everybody. Welcome back to Startup Happy Hour. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and I'm here today with our guest, Peter Voss. Peter is the CEO and founder at Aigo, an artificial intelligence company, and he is a leading expert in the space, so I'm really excited to talk to him more about AI. And so without further ado, Peter, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Diana.
So to start off, why don't you just tell people a little bit more about what Aigo is? And for context, I know you've got quite the backstory, so it might be helpful to sort of start from the beginning and tell people how you got into the space and all of the work that you've done leading up to founding Aigo.
Yes, it's a little bit of a journey. So I started off as an electronics engineer, started my own company, electronics company, and then I fell in love with software, with programming computers, and so my company turned into a software company, and I developed an ERP system to help medium-sized companies manage, their inventory and accounting and payroll and all of that. And that company was quite successful. We went from the garage to 400 people quite quickly, and actually listed the company, did an IPO, so that was super exciting. And it's really when I exited that company, I had the time and freedom to think about what big project do I want to tackle. What's really going to excite me. And the thing that struck me is really how dumb software is. Software doesn't have any intelligence. I was very proud of my software, but still, if I didn't think of something and the user would use it differently, then it would just crash or give you an error message or something that really didn't have any common sense and couldn't learn and adapt. So that's really what I wanted to figure out. So I took off 5 years to deeply study what intelligence is. To build an intelligent system, I have to first understand intelligence. And I started with philosophy, epistemology, theory of knowledge. How do we know anything? And how can we be certain of things? What is our relationship to reality? What is reality? So really the core foundations of intelligence and understanding, and also understanding what IQ tests measure, if they're meaningful, how children learn, how our intelligence differs from animal intelligence, all of those aspects of it. And of course, I also studied what other work had been done in the field of AI over the decades. So putting that all together, I came up with a design for a thinking machine. And in 2001, I actually coined the term artificial general intelligence together with 2 other people, and we wrote a book on the topic. And that is really to bring us back to the original ideal, or the idea, the original vision of people who coined the term artificial intelligence, to have machines that can think and reason and learn the way humans do. And over the decades, we've really lost that vision, because it turned out to be a really, really hard problem to build thinking machines. And so what happened over the decades, people chose one particular problem, like chess playing or container optimization or some narrow medical diagnosis or something. And then they took the programmers, the designers' intelligence to really figure out how to use a computer to solve the problem. So it's really the external intelligence of the programmer or the data scientist that solved the problem using a computer. It's not really the computer figuring out how to do it. And so with artificial general intelligence, it was really to go back to figuring out how can we build the intelligence into the computer, that it can learn, that it can reason, and not so much the programmer. So yeah, so that was 2001. 2001 also launched my first AI company. I hired about 12 people, and to turn my ideas, my design, into actual prototypes to experiment around with that. And over a number of years, we basically built a framework. And by 2008, we commercialized it, my first commercial AI company called Smart Action, to automate phone calls. So that was the first generation of our product. I exited that company and started Aigo.ai about 6-7 years ago. And for a number of years, for the first 5 years, we were actually again in development mode. So we only decided that we were ready to commercialize the second generation about 2 years ago. And so that's a long story. And so what we do with Aigo.ai is to bring intelligence to chatbots. So we call it a chatbot with a brain. Because nowadays, when you use a chatbot, they're really extremely limited. They don't have a brain. There's no thinking, there's no reasoning, there's no learning. So with our technology, we can offer a much better experience, and we can do a lot more things because our system actually remembers what you said, 5 minutes ago, even last week or last year, and it can reason.
Got it. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. Let's just start back from, you talked about the difference between AI and this new term AGI, artificial general intelligence, that you
Right.
coined. Let's talk a little bit more about, just so people really understand what's the difference between the two. When we talk about traditional AI, I think a lot of people think of, basic chatbots or even Alexa, even Netflix, how they can, give you suggested movies that you should watch,
Right.
things like that. And then AGI, then, like, what it sounds almost like we're trying to replicate the human brain in a sense and have computers do much more sophisticated functions than just be able to detect what sorts of movies you like and what sorts of music you like. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So AGI is really more of the kind of AI you see in the movies. Not the scary parts. So we'll talk about that because obviously in films you always the AI is always the bad guy. So I don't believe that's at all the case. But yes, it's to have really thinking machines, a machine that you can have a really meaningful conversation with, that has common sense, that can learn and remember. And that's not what we're seeing in AI, as you say, for recommendations. It's just some algorithm, using lots of data that the big companies accumulate, and basically number crunching that data and then predicting based on a statistical model. If you like this movie, you'll probably like that movie, and so on. So the field of AI in the last 8 or 9 years has really been dominated by what's called deep learning, machine learning. And that's a revolution where basically about 9 years ago or so, companies figured out how they could use massive amounts of data that the big companies had accumulated, like Amazon and Google, how they could use it, and with a lot of computing power, to build these very large predictive models, statistical models. And that's really what's dominating the field. But there's no thinking, no learning, no common sense, no context. You can't really have a conversation. So even if you look at things like Siri and Alexa, and Siri certainly is a breakthrough in being able to translate the spoken word into text that it can, understand. I mean, Siri was quite a revolution in that regard, and Alexa is sort of following in the footsteps. But if you look at what they actually do, they don't understand, they don't remember what you said, they don't reason. They just take some utterance that you say. So for example, if I say, I hate Uber, don't ever give me Uber again, it'll probably trigger the Uber app, because it just latches on, oh, you're saying something about Uber, you probably want the Uber app, So they just categorize what they hear and say, well, that's the most likely slot, that's the most likely thing. You either want the weather report, or you want to turn on the lights, or or get Uber or whatever. And so there's no deep understanding. They just basically categorize. They say, okay, so what you said sounds like you want this to be done. And then somebody writes a little program to do that, to give you like the Uber app and say, well, where do you want to go? How many people are going? And do you want Uber X? Or if it's a weather report, it'll look at, well, what region you're in, and then I'll give you the weather report. But there's, there really isn't any real intelligence. It's a programmer who designed the whole system to simply categorize the utterance and then to do something.
Right, got it. So then what are some real life applications that you see AGI being used in the future?
Right. So AGI is the idea to build a machine that can think and reason and learn like humans do. Now, we're still quite a long way away from human level intelligence. So if you think of, our technology is pretty much state of the art. I mean, we are one of very, very few companies actually working on practical commercial AGI applications. So we, if you try to relate it to human IQ, that maybe at the moment we're at, I don't know, an IQ of 35 or something, with our machines. So there's still a lot that our systems can't do relative to human, but it's basically the way the system does it, and we can keep increasing the IQ. So what our systems can do is, for example, if you have a conversation, I mean, that's our main commercial focus, is a chatbot with a brain. So a chatbot that can do much more than other chatbots can do. So to illustrate, it will remember what you said earlier in the conversation, which other chatbots don't do. If you've already told it, my sister is moving to Seattle, or my sister has moved to Seattle, and then later on in the conversation you say, I want to send some flowers to my sister, then it should, remember what you said earlier. But even have long-term memory. You might have said that 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and the system will remember. So memory is a very important thing to have, but it's also to reason about things. And for example, you say send some chocolates to my sister. You may have two sisters, so the system should be smart enough to know that and say which one, which sister do you want to send it to? And then you could say the one in Seattle. So that requires reasoning, where the system then, needs to think about, okay, you've got two sisters, one of them lives in Seattle and the other one doesn't. So, okay, I know which one you're talking about. For us as a human, it's just automatic. We don't even think about it, that kind of common sense reasoning. So it's, so it's learning, it's memory, it's reasoning, it's common sense. And that gives you the ability to have meaningful conversation, and also for that conversation to be hyper-personalized to the individual. So it's not like a one-size-fits-all.
Got it. So all of that makes perfect sense. I'm just wondering, taking that even a step further, if I, for example, if I got a new job offer and I couldn't decide whether to take it or not, or to stay at my current job, and I needed some advice, and this is advice that maybe I would go to a mentor for, a parent, or a trusted friend, or somebody, could I then go to my AGI, my Aigo, and say, hey, here's my situation. Okay, this is how I see the pros and cons weighing in my favor or against my favor. What do you think? Tell me what you think. Do you think I should take this new job? Is that something that Aigo could do for me as well? Like almost taking it another step of the reasoning, more so than just memory. Those things are basic. Like those things you can train a little kid to do. Like a little kid can remember,
Right.
what your sister's
Right.
name is, and that you just told them your sister moved to Seattle. They can remember these things. But this is more, I'm talking higher level, like things that you would only trust an adult, a
Right.
mentor, to help you with.
Yeah. So absolutely. I mean, that is definitely the kind of thing that Aigo can and will be able to do. And I say can and will be able to do because, again, there are limitations of how much common sense knowledge, how much background knowledge our current systems have. So actually the example you give is a good one because we are actually talking to several companies that want to use Aigo for recruitment, basically to have it both to help the recruiter go through resumes, but also to help the individual look at and compare the different job offers. So Aigo will learn your preferences, what you like, what you don't like, what your strengths and weaknesses are. Will learn which offers you've rejected and the reason you've rejected them. So that is something we're working on right now with our technology. So it's ready for that. But the more abstract and the more philosophical you get, and the more general world knowledge is required, That will take some time for Aigo to sort of grow into. But that's exactly what we see doing with Aigo, that ultimately our real ambition is for everybody to have their own Aigo. So right now we are working with enterprise clients who use Aigo as a sort of concierge assistant that they offer their clients, or they may use it internally in the company, to help make their people more productive. But ultimately, if a gifting company or an employment company gives you an Aigo, it's still their agenda that they're trying to fill. So they wouldn't want you to go to another recruiter, for example. It wouldn't give you that kind of advice. Of course, they're paying us to develop it. But ultimately, our real motivation is for the individual to own Aigo. And we actually have a name for that. We call that a personal assistant. And the reason we call it it should really be personal assistant. But the reason we call it personal assistant is the word personal has three distinct meanings that are important here. The first meaning is personal in you own it, it's yours. So you want the Aigo not to belong to Apple or to Amazon or to some other, your insurance company or something. You want to own it. So that's the first meaning of personal. You own it, you control it, it serves your needs. The second personal is that it's hyper-personalized to you. It knows you very well. It knows your background, your motivations, your likes, your dislikes, your history, and so on. So that's the second personal. And the third personal is it's private, so that you decide what it shares with whom. So that is our vision ultimately. And then pretty much as you explained, it's sort of really like an angel on your shoulder that can give you good advice as well. If you're going to do something in your life that you might regret, Aigo might tell you, well, maybe you want to think about this first. So another way to look at it is actually we call it an exocortex. It's an extension of your brain. It's an extension of yourself. So that's where we see Aigo going eventually with those capabilities. Absolutely, as a trusted helper and assistant.
Yeah, that's awesome. Something that I heard you talk about in a separate podcast is sort of an application of Aigo as an even higher trusted advisor. Obviously talking about whether I should take a new job or not. This is a big decision in every person's life. But beyond that, having Aigo be, for instance, a political advisor to the president of the United States,
Right.
that is, that then we're talking even more serious things, because the decisions you make there, it's not just going to impact yourself, but it's going to impact an entire country. And so when we talk about these things, I guess one thing that I heard you get into on the other podcast is about issues of morality. And you said you studied philosophy and ethics while you were learning about AI, and all of these things definitely tie together, because if you're going to have a trusted advisor, you want to make sure that their morals align with yours. But when we're talking about morality or ethics, to a certain extent, this is a very subjective term. And there are some things that, I think we can all agree are immoral, like murder, but when we sort of drill down to the day-to-day things, there are a lot of things that sort of fall into that gray area where to one person it may be moral and to another person it may be immoral, or across cultures even. In the Western culture, we might say that it's immoral for men to control their wives, or something like that. In another culture, they might say, well, it's immoral for women to want to go out and get a career and have jobs and wear clothing that show their body parts and things like that. So even from culture to culture, that definition really differs. So when you are building morality into Aigo or teaching it morality, how do you go about doing that?
Right. Yeah, very good question. So first of all, yes, I've written quite a lot about, I've studied ethics and morality quite a bit, and things like free will and consciousness. I've been very interested in really deeply understanding that. So I've written, and people can find that on medium.com. I have a lot of articles on that. I actually believe that morality should not be subjective. It should be more like a science, that it's objective. Now, this is quite controversial, but I believe there are good reasons for that. And once you really go back to understanding, why do we even need morality? Why do we want morality? And if you accept that the reason we want morality to improve our lives, to improve individual lives, to improve human life, that's really what it is. And there are objective ways of talking about what makes for a better life. I mean, the obvious things are physical health, physical well-being, but there's also mental well-being, which is also pretty objective. You know, you can tell whether somebody is mentally ill or not. And then there's sort of psychological or spiritual well-being, and I don't mean this in a religious sense at all, but I mean it more in the ability to appreciate, art forms and things of that nature. And I would say that probably most people would agree that you can optimize life, human life, by basically being physically, mentally, and spiritually healthy, that well-being. And if morality is a set of principles, of rules and principles, not hard and fast rules, they don't always apply, because you said murder, killing somebody may be the right thing to do under certain circumstances. But in most cases, of course, it isn't. So understanding what those principles are, those general principles are, and where they come from, what hierarchy they have, which principles are more important than other principles, then you actually have a basis for cutting across these differences, or for consolidating these differences and saying, I mean, today it's not that controversial anymore if you say slavery is wrong. But there was a time when you might have made the same argument. Well, some cultures think it's good and some cultures think it's bad. So I think there are actually objective ways of coming to conclusions as to, whether women should be subservient to men or not. Again, that may not be that controversial in the audience we're talking to here. So there is actually a right and wrong, I believe, if you address it for saying what will allow the most flourishing of individuals. And so that to me is the basis for morality. So you ask me, how do we program Aigo? Well, the answer is we don't actually program Aigo. The idea is not to program Aigo with my morality or your morality or anybody's morality. What we want Aigo to do is to look objectively at the world and say, what will improve your life? And not just in the short term, not just, if you rip off somebody today, or if you can murder somebody today and get away with it, does it actually improve your life? And there are a whole lot of reasons why it isn't. And that's why people talk about being principled and having virtues that are basically good principles that are embodied in that. So you can't go through life on, every split second deciding, should I be lying now or should I be telling the truth? Should I be lying, should I be telling the truth? That's why to optimize your life, it's a good principle to tell the truth. Now, again, there'll be exceptions of where, to protect your life or to protect some higher value, you do lie and you should lie. So I think these are all things that can be sorted out. And my belief is we don't have to teach Aigo the conclusions that we've come to, which may be not the best conclusions, because we are subject to, the teachers, the culture and upbringing. I'm sure 50 years from now, we will look back on some of the things we thought were okay and think they're probably quite wrong. So we don't want Aigo to have our current morality. We want Aigo to look at the world, think about it, and say, this is a better option than that option. And an AI is actually ideally suited for this kind of rational moral analysis. We as humans are actually not that good at that. And I'll give you an example of the contrast between human and AI. if we think back of, if we look at things that we've done that we maybe regret, that we think weren't the right things, typically they're for one of three reasons. It's either because we acted emotionally. 9/11 is a perfect example of it. We just want to get back at somebody. So we're driven by emotion, not by reason. The second thing is we often make decisions based on very limited information, that we're not very good at doing a lot of research. So it's the information we get from our favorite news media, which might be left or right or center, or from friends or teachers or whatever. So we don't have a lot of information. And the third thing, we're not really very good at reasoning or thinking logically. Evolution didn't really design us to be logical thinking machines. That sort of came later. Whereas an AI doesn't suffer from the emotional reaction. It's not going to react emotionally. It has the ability to gather much more information and make a much better decision, and to be able to think and reason better about things.
Got it. And so I'm just kind of curious, how would Aigo address, the basic problem that you're presented with in Philosophy 101, the trolley problem? You're driving a train, you're going down the railroad tracks. It's about you're going straight at five people that you're going to hit on the railroad track. If you flip a switch, you can divert and go to another track and only hit one person. Right. This is a famous problem. There's so much debate between it. But from Aigo's perspective, without all of the emotion that us humans have and things like that, how would Aigo solve that problem?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say that, while you describe it as a 101, and yes, it may come up in 101 philosophy, but it's actually an extremely bad example of what morals and ethics are about. There are sort of lifeboat situations, that's kind of, they fall into the category of lifeboat situations where there are no good answers. I mean, do you let everybody starve, or do you cannibalize one person and eat them, the weakest person or the oldest person or the whatever? There simply aren't any good answers to some of these dilemmas. So to try and build your ethics as a foundation is just hopeless. So you just have to accept there are situations that have no good answers. Now, Mercedes-Benz, for example, made a statement that what we will build into our cars is to first and foremost protect the owner of the car. That's what we as a car company are there for. I'm actually surprised that they made that statement and drew the line in the sand. And they say, well, if somebody else has to die outside to protect, the owner of the car, then that's a decision we make, and that's what we stand by. So in real life, you're hardly ever in a situation where there isn't some value judgment, where something is more important to you personally than something else. And that's perfectly right. I think it's insane to say that every life is of equal value. It simply doesn't work that way. I mean, you can't possibly, nobody can realistically say and support the statement that some unknown kid somewhere in the world, in Africa or wherever, that you have nothing, nothing about, that child is as important as your own child or as your spouse. I mean, it's insane. So we have people that are close to us, that are of value to us personally, are simply more valuable. I mean, I think it's generally accepted that people say, well, the President of the United States is more valuable than other people. Like the people who protect them are expected to give their life to protect now, they can't be of equal value then, can they? So, as I say, these emergency lifeboat situation things are not at all a good proxy for trying to understand morality.
Got it. That makes sense. Earlier, you sort of joked about what we see in the movies with these AI bots and how sometimes things can go the wrong way. And,
Right.
with shows like, what is it, Dark Mirror, shows that sort of portray the darker side of technology
Right.
and some of the scary things that can happen with the development of technology, especially I think AI is a great example of that. Do you see Aigo being misused, or is there any risk? What are some challenges or obstacles that you see might happen down the line once more and more people get a hold of Aigo?
Yeah. So, I think every technology can be misused, and the um, the advantage that an Aigo has, or why it's less likely to be abused, that the more useful your Aigo becomes to you, the more you rely on Aigo's advice, the more rational advice you're going to get, and the more advice you're going to get not to do silly things that are going to end you up in jail or whatever, that are going to have a bad outcome. So in that sense, it's actually going to, I believe very firmly, it's going to make us better people. So, and to the extent that we don't listen to the AI and say, hey, help me rob this bank or help me, scam somebody into, Aigo isn't going to be able to give very good advice because it has so many downsides. It doesn't make sense in the real world to do it. So I think there's sort of a safety built in through the intelligence, that the more intelligent you have, the less likely you are to do silly things or things that you regret. So I think there's that kind of safety net. Now, that's not to say that it can't be abused in some way. It will, but I think the overwhelming force will be many more Aigos. It's a bit like saying how many cops do you have and how many crooks do you have? How many good guys or bad guys? Make it more neutral. Too many people don't think the cops are the good guys anymore, unfortunately. Come to that. But, there are going to be more good guy Aigos than bad guy Aigos, or people that are using Aigo in a bad way. And I think that will help. But clearly, as humans, it's going to be very challenging for us to deal with the rapid change and that AI, advanced AI, will bring. There's an enormous amount of good, but it will be challenging. There will be many professions that will just disappear. They won't make sense for humans to do them anymore. But then you have to ask yourself, how many people don't want to win the lottery and actually retire or be able to do the things they really want to do rather than having to work for a living? And this is ultimately what AI promises us, is to have this incredible abundance where AIs can do the work for us.
For sure. Okay, so a couple of timeline questions for you. The first is, say, let's put ourselves, I don't know how many years into the future. Well, yeah, okay. So first question, how long until everybody can get their own Aigo?
All right. Well, whenever I'm asked that question, I say I don't measure it in time, I measure it in money. Because we're a relatively small company. Amazon, I believe, have 10,000 people working on Alexa, some number like that. Incredible number of. So the billions of dollars that they're spending on Alexa, and Alexa really has no intelligence. It doesn't have a brain. Now, we're currently a team of 25 people. We're growing very rapidly, so we'll probably be double that in a year from now. But it's a drop in the ocean. So we don't really know of any other company that has put as much effort into trying to build a personal assistant with a brain, a chatbot with a brain. Or don't really want to call it a chatbot anymore, but it's the quickest way to describe it. Personal assistant. So it's really how quickly can we gear up and have a big enough team to teach Aigo all of the common sense knowledge it needs to have, to crank up the IQ and so on. And, I don't think this is going to take many billions of dollars, but it'll certainly take more than 25 people that we have right now working on it. So if enough resources are put into solving this problem, either in our company or other companies who may be working on it, I believe it could easily happen in less than 10 years that we would have, human level personal assistant. Now, we'll already be providing personal assistance to individuals very soon, probably as soon as next year, but they'll still be very limited. You won't be able to have that very deep philosophical discussion or asking for very deep advice. It would only be within the limited domain that we've been able to teach it, give it enough knowledge that it can actually, give you advice.
That just raised another thought too, is how do you see Igo impacting people's social lives? I guess I don't know how to say it. So for instance, if I'm sort of an introvert, I'm sort of a recluse, and I don't like to go out anyway, and then I get an Igo, and the Igo sort of becomes my best friend. I can have conversations with my Igo. I can ask for advice. I can watch TV with them, do all of
Yeah.
the things. Do you see having a personal robot assistant almost killing people's
Yeah.
social lives? Like this is sort of the complaint that people have about social media, is that now everybody
Right.
just sits behind their phone screen and types on
Right.
Instagram and Twitter, and nobody goes out and talks to people in real life anymore.
Mhm.
Do you see Igo taking that a step further, or having this similar complaint from people about killing people's social lives?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I certainly hope, I mean, then you can also go one step further and you have an inflatable darling, I mean, have your sex partner as well, all wrapped up in your perfect mate. So I certainly will do my best that Igo also is trained as a very good psychologist, and that Igo will hopefully tell you to, hey, get out a bit. You're going to get more out of life, by meeting other humans, And so I really believe that, Igo will help people to flourish. And part of flourishing is that, yeah, you don't get addicted to video games or get addicted to Igo. I think that'll be part and parcel of it. But it is a big fear that if people don't have to work anymore, are they just going to be on drugs or, get high on Igo? It, and really, I can, my best guess and my best answer and my hope is that Igo, being a good psychologist as well, will be able to help people really help to choose a fulfilling, open life.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And then the second timeline question I had from earlier is, once, say 10 years down the line, when everybody can get their own personal I go get my Igo, how long does it take from bringing Igo home until my personal Igo knows my personality well enough to be able to advise me on the right things to do based on who I am as a person?
Oh, interesting question. I don't think I've thought about a timeline there. Now, first of all, and at that point, an Aigo will be able to read whatever you give Aigo access to. So if you want Aigo to fast track, I think you could think of it as a very patient, if you hired a personal assistant, a human, and and you had a lot of money, money was no object, and you gave that person access to all of your documentation. And they actually had the ability to read enough of it to find your background, who are the people in your life, what decisions did you make, and so on. So could get all that background information. And then if you had this personal assistant, you wanted them to know everything about you, they would probably come back with lots and lots of questions, to fill in the gaps and say, oh, I didn't find any documentation between this and that, or why did you make this decision? But you could probably sort of brief them or debrief. They could debrief you, whichever way you want to look at it. Over a few days, asking the most pertinent question, and then kind of things would fall into place for Aigo and say, okay, I have a pretty good idea about this person. There aren't major contradictions, because I read this here, they made this decision here and that decision there. They don't really make sense, but then you explain and say, oh, okay, that's why that made sense, Either there was some life-changing event or there was a piece of the puzzle missing or something. So I think an Aigo could get to know you quite well very quickly, but quicker than a human could, getting to know a person. But obviously they would still learn more and more of the nuances, and also as you evolve over time.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. I was just thinking, with a human comparison, the human would have to live with you and talk to you and, sort of hang around you for a while before they get to know you. But you're right. And Aigo can just go through all of your documents, go through your social media, go through everything that you've ever done that there's any record of, and get to know you very quickly that way. Awesome. Right. Well, Peter, this has been really great. One final thing. An interesting thing that I found about you is that you actually never finished high school, yet here you are, having coined AGI, something that is going to be really big for people in the future, and worked on such amazing projects. What would be your number one advice to a high school kid who is, whatever stage of high school they're in, whether they're, wanting to go on to college or wanting to drop out? What's your number one piece of advice for them for how to make an impact in the world like you have, whether that's founding a company or whatever the case may be? What would you say to them?
Yeah, so two things. The one thing, I certainly wouldn't advise anybody to drop out of school particularly. I mean, it worked out for me, my circumstance where I had to leave school. I had to leave school and start work at 16. And it worked out well for me. I love learning by myself. I'm self-motivated. And it probably worked out better for me than if I'd gone through university, and it would have taken a lot longer, and I might have ended up sort of getting stuck in academia or something. Who knows? But two pieces of advice here from my experience. I started my first company when I was 25, and one of the big regrets I have that I didn't do that much earlier. And I'm not saying you should drop out of school necessarily, but if you can sort of get involved in, if that's the kind of person you are, if that's what you want to do, maybe you can, start a little business, start a little company, be a partner, do something together with friends or whatever. But the sooner you can learn what it takes to run your own company or to be part of a, owner of a company and get that experience, that feeling and that buzz, the sooner you do that, I think the better. But the second, even the more important thing, I think, is to find something that you're passionate about. I mean, I've been on this project now for 25 years, solid. I love what I'm doing. I'm fully motivated. I couldn't think of wanting to do anything else. If you can find something that you're passionate about, and whether it's running your own business or not, doesn't really matter. But I think there's nothing worse than going through life doing a job that you really don't care about. You're just doing because you need to get paid. I think that's really terrible. Try and find your passion, and hopefully find a passion that also pays, or find some way that you can make your passion pay.
Right. Well, you're obviously very passionate about AI, AGI, and it's hard to imagine you really spending too much time on other things besides researching AI. But tell people a little bit more about who Peter is as a person. What are some of your hobbies? What do you do outside of researching AI and working on Aigo?
You're right. I don't do much else. I'm very interested in life extension. I love life, and I think it's such a pity that just when you learn how to live life, and I sort of half jokingly say, after you've been married and divorced a few times, raised a few kids, had a few careers, a few bankruptcies, and so on, you're just sort of getting the hang of life. Oh yeah, this is what you have to do to live life properly. You die. I mean, that's crazy, just sort of when we get the hang of it, we all right, now I can get going. Now I know how to do this life thing, So I'm very interested in life extension. Hopefully technology and Aigo can help to develop technology that will allow us to live much longer and have indefinite lifespans. So I'm very interested in futurism, life extension. I've been doing calorie restriction for about 23 years to try and stay as healthy for as long as possible. So that's one of my key interests is life extension and futurism in general. And as a total contradiction to life extension, I also love riding motorcycles. I have a 200 horsepower BMW motorcycle that can do almost 200 miles an hour, and I love riding it. So I love going to concerts as well. I go to a lot of concerts, obviously not in the last year. So those are some of the things. I used to do a lot of traveling, scuba diving and so on, but that's become kind of less important now.
Got it. I do find that ironic that your main hobbies happen to be life extension and riding motorcycles.
Right.
But I mean, you have to enjoy the life that you live, right? Your main focus can't
That's
be
my
on living as long as
that's
possible.
my excuse. Life has to be worth living too. Yeah.
Right, yeah. All right. Well, a couple of just fun random questions to wrap up here. The
Right.
first one, since you're all about living a healthy life and life extension, if you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what would that be?
Wow. I never think of eating just one food, but I really do enjoy salads like, Chinese chicken salad or something like that. But I'm sure I'd get tired of that, whatever it was that I chose. So it's a bad choice to only have one food. So,
Totally. And
right.
hopefully this hypothetical will never have to apply to anybody. And then
Right.
second question, if you could have any superpower, what would that be? And you can't say to live forever because we already know that's probably going to be your answer.
Oh, all right. Well, then you've answered it. To be smarter,
To be
so that
smarter.
I could get Aigo built sooner, quicker.
Yeah, I had somebody on my podcast recently said that the superpower they would want is to be able to read like everything super fast instead of like the normal speed of reading
Right.
that because then you could just consume all the knowledge in the world if you could, read if it wouldn't take you any time to read. All right, well,
Yeah.
Peter, thank you so much. I love this conversation. It got way more philosophical than we normally get on Startup
Right.
Happy Hour, but I really enjoy that. I was actually a moral and ethical philosophy minor in college, so definitely something I've been
Okay.
interested in for a while. Before you go, just tell people where they can find you if they want to connect with you personally, where they can go read more of your writings on Medium, and then where they can go to learn more about Igo.
Yes, certainly. Aigo.ai, Aigo.ai, a website. It actually has links to a lot of articles and demos and things. You can find all of my articles, pretty much all of my articles on medium.com, just Peter Voss, and you'll find it quite easily. I am LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and it's pretty easy to find me personally. If you want to interact, you could just, on any of those channels, contact me or simply email peter@aigo.ai.
Perfect. And we'll include all those links in the show notes as well. So it's easy for people to click through to them. Well, thanks so much, Peter. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank
Yeah.
you, listeners, for tuning in. And we'll be back again soon with another episode of Startup Happy Hour.